There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from collapse, from the slow erosion of your own self-worth. And it always begins the same way. Someone makes a joke. Your name is in it. It stings for a second, but you smile. You tell yourself it's not worth the drama. You let it go. And they see that. So the next time, they go further, sharper, louder, more public. And by the time you finally feel the need to respond, the damage is already done. Because here's what no one tells you. Disrespect ignored. Is disrespect approved? Machiavelli understood this. He knew the world doesn't run on fairness. It runs on perception, on fear, on status, on leverage. And in that world, you don't earn respect. You enforce it. When someone disrespects you, it isn't just about that one moment. It's a test, a signal. They want to see if they can push you without consequence, and how you respond in that split second decides how they treat you next time, and how everyone watching learns to treat you too. This isn't about rage. It's not about dominance. It's not about becoming aggressive. It's about presence. It's about silence that burns, distance that teaches, and decisions that say more than any comeback ever could. Because when you handle disrespect correctly, you don't just protect your name, you become the standard. So don't flinch, don't beg, don't explain. They don't need to understand. They need to feel the shift. This is how it begins. Not with noise, but with discipline, with stillness, with the kind of silence they never expected would cost them everything. If you've ever stayed silent, and it cost you more than you thought, tell us. You're not alone. Disrespect doesn't show up with a raised voice. It doesn't announce itself. It slips in through a smile, through a pause that lingers just a little too long, through a joke that cuts a little too deep. It arrives dressed in subtlety, so quiet. You almost miss it. So casual. You question yourself. Was that a joke? Was it personal? Am I overreacting? That hesitation is the entry point. That doubt is the cost. Because in that moment, you start negotiating your worth with someone who's already decided to test it. And when you smile it off, when you act like you didn't notice, you don't rise above it. You sink below it. You don't keep the peace. You surrender the frame. Because the first act of disrespect is never about hurting you. It's about reading you, watching how you respond, seeing how far they can push without being pushed back. Machiavelli knew this. He knew that power isn't in how you speak. It's in what you tolerate, in the energy you withdraw, and in the message that silence delivers when it's used with precision. So when they test you, don't explain, don't perform, don't give them what they want. A reaction. Just pause. Let the moment stretch. Let the joke hang in the air. No applause. No laughter. No acknowledgement. Let your stillness speak louder than their punchline ever could. Because when you don't play along, when you don't take the bait, you create something rare. Uncertainty. And uncertainty is fear in disguise. They expected compliance. They got a wall. They expected laughter. They got a void. And now they wonder, did I misread them? Did I just make a mistake? That pause, that discomfort, that absence of your energy becomes their new feedback loop. And here's the secret. You don't need to fight back to win. You just need to remove your validation. The laugh, the smile, the response. Take it away, and the game ends. Because disrespect only survives when you feed it. But when it's met with stillness, it starves. And that's your first move. Not a comeback, not a confrontation, but a strategic withdrawal, a refusal to fuel the game. A message that says, I saw what you did, and I'm not here to perform for your amusement. And if this message hits something deep, if you've ever smiled through a moment that broke you, let us know. Drop a comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe. It helps this channel grow. It helps this voice reach more people silently suffering the same battle. And if you believe content like this deserves to live on, support us through super thanks. Every contribution helps our team craft deeper, sharper, and more cinematic stories. Your presence here matters more than you know. Most people fight fire with fire. They meet sarcasm with sarcasm, disrespect with outrage. But that's not strategy. That's reaction. And the one who reacts always loses frame. Machiavelli understood something deeper. Power isn't in how loud you are. It's in how precise you become when tested. Because people who disrespect you, they don't want honesty. They want instability. They want to pull you into their chaos and watch you unravel. So instead of giving them noise, give them something they never expected. A mirror, not a punch, not an insult, a question. Surgical, sharp, still. You lock eyes. The room slows. And then you ask, did you mean it that way? No sarcasm, no tension, just control. Or you tilt your head slightly, calm, composed, and say, that sounded personal. Want to clarify before I respond? You've just changed the entire game. Because now, you're not defending yourself. You're inviting them to repeat what they just said with full awareness. You're not denying the insult. You're magnifying it, exposing it, and most importantly, recording it. In front of everyone, they expected you to take the hit, to brush it off, or explode. What they never expected was to be asked to explain themselves. And that hesitation, that flicker in their eyes, that's where you win. Because now they feel it. The power has shifted. You're not the one on trial anymore. They are. And most people won't repeat themselves when exposed. Because most people who disrespect you aren't bold. They're opportunistic. They say it when they think it's safe. They act tough in subtle ways. Until the light hits them. That's what your question does. It flips the spotlight. It forces them to confront what they were trying to get away with. And now, you don't even have to escalate. You've already won. Because the room watched. The tension rose. And you didn't lose your frame. You didn't crack. You didn't chase. You just asked the perfect question. That's how you take control without raising your voice. You didn't fight for power. You revealed it. And you left them to explain themselves to an audience they didn't know they had. Have you ever asked a question so calm, it shifted the whole room? Let us know below. The moment passed. You held the silence. You asked the question. You didn't flinch. And for the first time, they felt something new. Doubt. But this isn't where it ends. This is where most people get it wrong. Because once the tension fades, once the moment cools, they go back to normal. They laugh again. They open the door. They pretend nothing happened. And in doing so, they undo everything. Because when you return to normal, you tell them the line you drew was temporary. You signal that the consequence was just a moment, not a new rule. So here's your next move. You redraw the relationship. Completely. Immediately. And without explanation. From this point on, they no longer get the version of you they once had. The warmth is gone. The ease is gone. The familiarity. Cut at the root. You don't speak the same. You don't respond the same. You don't offer access to the energy they once abused. And you don't need to announce it. You let them feel it. Let them notice how your tone sharpens, how your replies become shorter, how the light in your eyes no longer meets theirs. You're not being cold. You're being clear. Because people learn not by what you say, but by what you withdraw. This is the Machiavellian method. You don't punish with fury. You punish with absence. Strategic, subtle, irreversible. And here's what happens next. They try to pull you back in. They joke again. They soften their tone. They test for signs of forgiveness. But you don't shift. You hold. Because the lesson hasn't settled until the consequence has weight. You're not angry. You're done. And they're the last to realize it. Others notice it too. They watch the distance grow. They watch how the tone changed. They see that something happened, even if no one says a word. That's power. Power built in silence, enforced by presence, made visible by the absence of what once was. You didn't yell. You didn't explain. You didn't attack. You just stopped returning energy to someone who no longer deserved it. And now the room knows. The people around them know. You are not the same. Not because they wounded you, but because they revealed themselves, and you adjusted accordingly. That's not revenge. That's realignment. Have you ever changed the entire tone of a relationship without saying a word? Most people know how to react once. They draw the line. They walk away. They say, "I'm done." But boundaries don't hold because of one moment. They hold because of consistency. They hold because you don't flinch, even after the dust settles. And the moment they sense that your door is still cracked open, they'll test it again. But this time softer, smarter, more disguised. They've adjusted their tone. They know how to wrap disrespect in humor, in a compliment, in silence, and if you let it pass again, even once, you teach them something permanent, that your boundary was just theater, a scene, a phase, that all it takes is time, and you'll go back to who you were. Soft, accessible, predictable. That's why the next step is not forgiveness. It's consequence, but not loud, not emotional, not performative. It has to be cold, clean, disproportionate, because if the punishment matches the offense, they forget it. If it exceeds the offense, they remember it forever. And no, you're not being petty. You're not being vindictive. You're sending a signal that access to you isn't something they can test twice, that your presence comes with a cost. So when they try again, you don't argue. You don't warn them. You don't justify. You make the correction visible. But surgical. They speak. You pose. Then you turn to someone else. You change the subject. You erase them from the moment. They joke. You respond with a single word. Then shift your attention not out of spite, but precision. You're not punishing them. You're demonstrating. They no longer exist in your emotional economy. You're not angry. You're unavailable. And that's what stings most. Not being insulted, but being ignored by someone who once saw you. It's not loud, but it's unforgettable. Because silence is not the absence of emotion. It's the presence of control. Machiavelli believed real power doesn't come from outbursts. It comes from the moment people realize they've lost something they didn't even know could be taken. Not a title, not attention, access. And when you remove it not with rage, but with silence, they feel it in places they can't name. Their chest tightens, their smile fades, their tone shifts, the room grows colder, and no one says why. But they all know. You didn't confront them. You didn't explain. You let them experience what life feels like without your energy. And others take note. They watch how you move, how you no longer reach out, how you no longer entertain the familiar. They become more careful. They become more respectful. Not because you demanded it, but because they've seen what happens when someone crosses the line. It's not a meltdown. It's a disappearance. One so quiet. It echoes. That's your leverage. Not power through fear, but power through consequence without drama. Because here's the truth. People don't learn from how loud you get. They learn from how cold you become, from how quickly you shift from warmth to stillness. And when you do it right, they never know whether to apologize or never speak again. That uncertainty, it's your shield, it's your sword, and it's your signature. What's more unforgettable in your life? A fight or a quiet exit? By now, the disrespect has passed. You didn't flinch. You didn't fight. You didn't explain. You just shifted, quietly, precisely. And now, the room is watching. Because this is the part that separates the powerful from the temporary. Anyone can stand tall for one moment. Anyone can hold their frame for a single interaction. But the ones who are truly respected, they don't just react once. They live the boundary. They become it. And now, everyone is waiting to see if you meant it. They observe how you walk, how you speak, how you carry yourself after the silence. Do you return to softness? Do you pretend it never happened? Do you open the door again? Because if you do, it was all for nothing. Because when you soften again, they see it, they feel it, they know the boundary was built on emotion, not on principle, that your silence was temporary, that your distance was a tactic, not your new standard. And now they know the game. They'll play it better next time. But if you stay cold, if your energy remains unchanged, if your distance becomes the new default, then something else happens. Something rare, something irreversible. You stop being a reaction. You become a reputation. People begin to describe you differently. Not as loud, not as dramatic, but as calculated, measured, clear. They say things like, "He doesn't say much, but you don't get to cross him twice." Or, "She's not angry. She just isn't available anymore." Your name no longer floats lightly. It carries weight. And that weight travels. It reaches people before you do. It enters the room before you speak. It sets a tone before you take your seat. And here's what matters most. You didn't have to say a word. You didn't explain your boundary. You embodied it. You didn't declare who you are. You demonstrated it. Because now, you don't have to explain yourself. They've already seen what happens when someone pushes you. They've watched you pull back, withdraw, freeze the air around you. And they adjusted, not because you asked them to, because you showed them what your absence feels like. That's how reputations are built. Not with speeches, but with subtractions. You removed your laughter, your ease, your energy, and in doing so, you made one truth loud and clear. Respect isn't what you demand. It's what people preserve when they fear losing your presence. When they realize you only give one version of you, and if they mishandle it, there's no second draft. The air around you shifts. Their language softens. Even the confident ones speak with caution, because they're not afraid of you. They're afraid of being ignored by you, afraid of being shut out from what you gave freely and can now take without warning. Because you've proven one thing, without ever raising your voice. Your tolerance is not endless. Your presence is not guaranteed. And your energy is no longer up for negotiation. That's what reputation is. It's not noise. It's not branding. It's not performance. It's residue from moments that tested you and didn't break you. It's what people say when you leave the room, what they whisper when your silence stretches too long. And the longer you hold your standard, the more powerful that echo becomes. Because people may forget what you said, but they won't forget how your absence felt. That's legacy. That's control. And that's how the powerful stay powerful, not by yelling louder, but by saying less and meaning more. What does your name echo when you leave the room? Share with us. There will come a time when someone crosses the line and doesn't stop. They see your silence. They feel your withdrawal. And they push again. Not because they're strong, but because they crave disruption. They aren't testing your boundary. They're trying to break it. Not for power, but for sport. Because some people, they feed off discomfort. They want your reaction. They want to pull you back into the game you already left. And this is where most people fall. They get emotional. They retaliate. They try to prove they're not weak. But Machiavelli would laugh at that. Because nothing screams weakness more than reacting on cue. He would say, never strike on impulse. Strike with position. You don't meet chaos with chaos. You meet it with clarity. And here's how. You don't argue. You don't insult. You don't raise your voice. You turn their disrespect into a mirror. Held up in front of everyone. They make a joke. You pose. You don't smile. You don't shift in your seat. And calmly, without emotion, you ask, that's an interesting comment. Do you use that one at work too? Or, I'm surprised you said that out loud. And then you go quiet again. Now the game has flipped. You're not defending yourself. You're exposing them. Publicly. Elegantly. They expected a reaction. What they got was a spotlight. One they never agreed to step into. One they didn't see coming. And suddenly, they shrink. Their tone shifts. Their confidence fades. Not because you overpowered them, but because you let their own words collapse around them. You didn't attack. You just revealed. And that is far more brutal. Because now they're not facing you. They're facing themselves. In front of everyone else. In front of people they wanted to impress. This is social domination. It's not loud. It's not cruel. It's surgical. And it works. Because you remain calm. Collected. Unmoved. You don't act like a victim. You don't act like a hero. You act like someone who knew this moment was coming and prepared for it. That's what rattles them. Because you're no longer responding. You're orchestrating. The energy in the room shifts. People hold their breath. The smirk they had fades. The punchline. It backfires. And the silence that follows doesn't feel safe anymore. It feels sharp. Directed. Because it's not empty. It's charged with awareness. Everyone feels it. Everyone reads it. They thought you were passive. But now, you look like the one who's always been in control. And that realization, it stings deeper than any insult. Because what you just did without yelling, without attacking, was make them irrelevant. You let them expose themselves. And now, there's nothing left to say. No comeback. No explanation. Just that look in your eye that says, you did this. And I didn't have to lift a finger. That's real power. Not the kind that demands attention. The kind that withdraws it. And now, the audience watching has learned something permanent. You don't defend your name. You let others destroy theirs when they try to touch it. That's not a line. That's a legacy. Have you ever let someone collapse under their own words? Tell your story. At some point, the game ends, not because they've changed, but because you have. You no longer need to withdraw. You don't have to respond. You don't even flinch when challenged, because now you don't react. You simply exist differently. Something has shifted. Quietly, completely. Your presence no longer seeks control. It is control. The way you sit, the way you pause before you speak, the way you enter a room and the tone drops. That's not coincidence. That's command. Machiavelli knew. Power doesn't live in volume. It lives in ambiguity, in unpredictability, because people don't fear what they understand. They fear what they can't read. And now you've become unreadable. You speak less, but every word lands heavier. You respond slower, but your timing feels calculated, not delayed. You move like someone who's not looking for validation, but already holds it. You've stopped explaining. You've stopped asking to be understood. You've stopped trying to be liked. Now, they adjust to you. They recalibrate their tone. They edit their jokes. They rethink their approach. You didn't demand it. You didn't instruct them. You simply changed the climate by changing your presence. Because true presence doesn't chase attention. It bends it. It warps the room. Not with sound, but with silence. You sit in a meeting, say one sentence, and the entire strategy shifts. You walk into a conversation, and people straighten their backs. That's not ego. That's atmosphere. The result of boundaries enforced so clearly that you've become more than a person. You've become a frame. Not something to respond to. Something to respond within. And when you become the frame, everything else aligns around you. People don't interrupt you. Not because they fear your words, but because they fear what it means to lose your attention. You don't need to silence the room. The room silences itself. Because presence is louder than power. It's subtler, but more suffocating. It doesn't announce itself. It settles in, takes up space, becomes law. They no longer joke freely around you. They second-guess their phrasing. They watch your face searching for signs. Because uncertainty has become your armor, and the unknown is more intimidating than any direct threat. What happens if I go too far? Why did they pause just now? What are they thinking? Those questions are the new fear, not of punishment, but of not knowing. And the mind protects itself from what it doesn't understand. That's your edge. That's the shift. You don't build presence by adding noise. You build it by removing access. Access to your reaction, to your laughter, to your validation. And when you remove those things without anger, without warning, you become untouchable. Not because you built walls, but because they now doubt whether they ever had the key. And that doubt is what keeps them in check. Because you've stopped performing strength. You radiate it. You don't use energy to protect your frame. Your energy is the frame. And now they don't test you. Not because they fear you, but because they respect what your stillness implies. You've become the standard by which others measure their own behavior. And in your restraint, they see themselves. Do people adjust around your presence? Or are you still adjusting to theirs? Eventually, they come back. Not with force. With caution. A casual message. A softer tone. A question disguised as a joke. A half smile meant to test the water. They don't apologize. Not directly. Because to apologize is to admit, and to admit is to kneel. Instead, they circle. They test. They check in. Because they felt the shift. They felt your absence. And now they want to know, is the door still open? They joke like before. but it lands differently. They try the old tone, but it sounds rehearsed. They search your eyes for a sign of familiarity, for a trace of the warmth they once had free access to. And here's the moment, the final test. Not for them, for you. Because this is where most people break. They misread mercy as moral superiority. They want to appear forgiving. They want closure. They want to prove that they're above it. But Machiavelli would scoff at that, because true mercy, real, strategic mercy doesn't feel like kindness. It feels like a wall you didn't know existed until you ran straight into it. And that's what you offer now. Not revenge. Not explanation. Not even distance. Just unchanged presence. They make a joke. You blink. Nothing. They ask how you've been. You say good. Flat. Final. They wait for more. You give them less. Because you've moved on, and they're still in the last chapter rereading lines you no longer identify with. They try to reconnect. You don't push them away. You simply don't step forward. And that's what breaks them. Because what hurts most isn't that you're mad. It's that you're indifferent. They weren't sentenced. They vanished from a reality you no longer share. You didn't slam the door. You just stopped opening it. They expected drama. They got silence. They expected tension. They got a void. And that void is louder than rage. Because silence is not emptiness. It's closure without announcement. It's punishment they don't get to talk about. And everyone feels it. Everyone sees it. You didn't react because you were hurt. You didn't respond because they mattered. You stayed silent because they don't. That's the sentence. Not being punished, but being irrelevant, not in your words, but in your energy, in your gaze, in your absence. They thought they could come back, that all it took was time, that your silence had an expiration date. But now they realize your silence is permanent. And the worst part, you didn't announce it. You didn't declare exile. You just stopped arriving. And the message, it was received. Others feel it too. They watch how you act around them, how you don't lean in, how you don't entertain the familiar. They don't see anger. They see certainty. They don't see a grudge. They see a decision. And that's what rattles them most. Because they thought you needed the last word. But you became the last word. And your silence became the only sound they hear. Have you ever seen someone regret your indifference? By now, you've said nothing. And yet, they feel everything. Your silence has traveled. Your absence has shape. It has texture. It has memory. Your distance isn't empty anymore. It defines. It speaks. Because this is the final level, where you no longer need to enforce the boundary. The boundary enforces itself. People don't test you anymore. Not because you scare them, but because they don't know how close they're allowed to get. Something changed. Subtly, permanently, in the way people speak when you enter. Their tone softens. Their jokes shift. They choose their words with more intention. And all of this you didn't ask for. You enforced it by subtraction. You didn't lecture. You didn't threaten. You removed your reaction. You took your energy off the table. You stopped explaining. And now, the room bends around you. Machiavelli called this power without presence. It's the kind of power that remains active. Even when you're silent, it shapes the environment. It sets the emotional climate. Because your boundary is no longer a request, it's a reputation. You're no longer someone they think they can challenge. You're someone they assume they can't reach. Because when they crossed the line, you didn't just walk away. You made your absence impossible to ignore. And that absence grew. It whispered into the corners of conversations. It left fingerprints on their comfort. It rewrote the dynamics in every space you used to share. Now, people speak of you differently, carefully, with caution wrapped in respect. She doesn't come back around. He only gives one chance. If you lose him, it's done. That's the new law, the unspoken code. You didn't write it. You became it. You don't set boundaries anymore. Your name does. Your absence does. Your history does. Because the thing about true power is that it doesn't follow you. It precedes you. It enters the room first. It lingers after you leave. You've become untouchable. Not because you built walls, but because no one wants to be the reason you go silent again. Because now they know your silence isn't passive. It's tactical. It's intelligent. And it's final. You didn't slam the door. You erased the hallway. They don't know how to get back in. They're not even sure there's a door left. And that is the genius of it. You didn't chase justice. You didn't demand understanding. You created consequence that sustains itself. And now, others self-regulate. They lower their volume. They measure their approach. They watch your face for signs of approval. You no longer give easily. You no longer need to assert your value. They do the math themselves. And in every calculation, they remember the one moment you vanished, and how everything changed after that. That's how legacy is built. Not from words, but from moments where you could have spoken and didn't. Moments where others realized you didn't need to react because the consequence was already underway. Your absence became the answer, and your silence became the example they whisper about, but never question. What boundary have you set that no one dared to test again? Stop explaining. Stop hoping they'll understand. Stop giving second chances to people who used the first one to test your silence. Because this world, it doesn't reward kindness. It rewards clarity. It doesn't respond to how good you are. It responds to what happens when you're crossed. And the most powerful message you can ever send is to walk away before they realize they've been left behind. Machiavelli never taught revenge. He taught reputation. He didn't glorify cruelty. He weaponized control. And above all, he mastered one truth: that a single decision, carried with consistency, can echo louder than 1,000 speeches. You don't need to yell. You don't need to perform. You just need to choose who no longer gets access to the energy they once took for granted. And from that moment on, your name no longer enters lightly. It carries weight. It carries silence. It carries consequence. The kind that doesn't seek applause. The kind that doesn't beg to be understood. The kind that makes people rethink how they use their words around someone like you. So let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them joke. Because when they cross that line, you won't explain. You won't correct. You won't engage. You'll vanish. And that silence will speak for everything. If this spoke to you, leave a mark below. A thought, a moment, a silence